The biggest mistake I see every July is not that people forget to water their hostas. It is that they believe more water alone will save them from the heat. I used to think the same thing until I watched beautiful plants lose their rich color, their smooth leaves, and that full, healthy look even though the soil stayed wet every single day. If your hostas suddenly look tired, the edges turn brown, the leaves become dull, or the whole plant seems smaller every week, there is a good chance you are making one of the same mistakes that almost everyone makes when summer gets really hot. The sad part is that most of these problems are easy to prevent, but by the time people notice the damage, they think the season is already lost. I want to tell you right now that it is not too late. I have been growing hostas for many years, and July taught me more lessons than any gardening book ever could. I learned that these plants do not ask for expensive products or complicated treatments. They simply need the right care at the right moment. In this video, I will show you exactly what I changed to keep my hostas healthy, green, and attractive until autumn, even during weeks of strong heat. Some of these little habits were shown to me many years ago by an older gardener who never rushed around his garden and somehow always had the healthiest shade beds in the neighborhood. At first, I thought his methods were too simple to matter, but after trying them myself, I realized that simple things often make the biggest difference. Many gardeners spend money on fertilizers, leaf sprays, and special additives while completely ignoring the small daily decisions that quietly weaken their plants. That is where the real problem begins. Stay with me, because the first mistake I want to explain is probably the one that causes more damage than all the others combined. And once you understand why it happens, you will never look at your hostas the same way again. One mistake that almost nobody notices is watering at the wrong time of day. I used to think that if the soil looked dry in the afternoon, then that was exactly when I should grab the hose. It seemed logical because the plants looked thirsty and the heat was at its worst. But after a few summers I realized I was actually making things harder for my hostas instead of helping them. When the soil is already hot and you suddenly pour cold water over it, much of that moisture disappears before the roots can really use it. The leaves may look fresher for a short while, but by the next afternoon, they often look stressed all over again. That cycle repeats day after day until the plant slowly loses its healthy appearance. Most people think the problem is not enough water when the real problem is the wrong timing. The habit that changed everything for me was watering early in the morning before the sun became strong. The ground had time to absorb the moisture slowly, and the roots stayed cooler for much longer. On especially hot weeks, I checked the soil again in the evening instead of watering automatically. Many times I found that the soil was still moist just a few inches below the surface, even though the top looked dry. That simple check saved water and kept me from overwatering. Few people do this because the dry surface tricks them into thinking the entire plant is thirsty. Another lesson an older gardener shared with me many years ago was to stop looking only at the leaves and start paying attention to the soil itself. He would push one finger gently into the ground and smile if he still felt cool moisture below the top layer. That little habit costs nothing, but it prevents one of the biggest July mistakes. Too much water can be almost as harmful as too little because constantly wet soil leaves the roots weak and unable to handle heat. Healthy roots are what keep the leaves beautiful through the hardest part of summer. In a moment, I will show you another simple habit that many gardeners ignore completely, even though it protects hostas during long periods of hot weather, better than many expensive products sold at garden centers. The next thing I learned surprised me because it seemed almost too simple to make a real difference. Most gardeners pay attention to watering but forget about protecting the soil itself. If the ground around your hostas is left bare in July, the sun keeps heating it from morning until evening. The roots sit in warm soil for hours, and every day they have to work harder just to keep the leaves looking fresh. I used to wonder why my hostas looked fine after a cool night but tired again by late afternoon, even when I had watered them properly. Then, an older neighbor showed me something he had done for years, without ever talking about it. He covered the soil with a layer of shredded leaves bark or homemade compost instead of leaving the ground exposed. He told me that the roots needed shade just as much as the leaves did. I tried the same method and the change was easy to see before the month was over. The soil stayed cool much longer after watering, and I noticed that I did not have to reach for the hose nearly as often. That saved both time and water, and the plants looked calmer even during the hottest days. Very few people think about this because mulch does not look exciting, and it costs almost nothing if you use materials from your own yard. Many gardeners spend money on products that promise stronger plants while ignoring one of the oldest methods that has worked for generations. Another mistake happens when people pile the mulch right against the crown of the hosta. I made that mistake once and quickly realized it holds too much moisture where it should stay dry. Now, I always leave a small gap around the base of the plant so air can move freely. That little space helps prevent unnecessary problems while still keeping the roots cool. It is a small detail, but details are often what separate healthy hostas from struggling ones by the end of summer. There is another habit that most people never question, because they believe they are helping their plants. I believed it too for many years until I discovered it was quietly stealing the strength my hostas needed to stay beautiful all the way into autumn. There's another mistake that I made for years because I honestly believed I was helping my hostas stay strong. Every time July arrived, I reached for fertilizer thinking the plants needed extra food to fight the heat. It sounded reasonable because healthy plants need nutrients, and I wanted bigger leaves and richer color. What actually happened was the opposite. Fresh feeding during the hottest part of summer encouraged soft new growth at the exact time the plant was already under stress. Those young leaves looked beautiful for a short while, but they were the first to suffer when several hot afternoons arrived in a row. The edges began to dry out, and the whole plant looked tired much sooner than the older hostas that I had simply left alone. That was the moment I understood that July is not the time to push a hosta into growing faster. It is the time to help it stay steady and healthy. An experienced gardener explained it to me many years ago in a way I never forgot. He said that during a heat wave you would not ask someone to run faster. You would help them stay comfortable until the weather became easier. I have followed that advice ever since. If my hostas received compost or fertilizer earlier in the season, I let them rest through the hottest weeks. Instead of feeding, I spent a few minutes removing damaged leaves that were badly burned or lying on the ground. I never removed too many at once because every healthy leaf is still making energy for the plant. I only took away the ones that were clearly finished. That simple cleaning improved air movement around the plant and made the whole clump look fresh again without costing a single dollar. Very few people do this because they worry about cutting any leaves at all. The truth is that careful cleaning is very different from heavy pruning. Most gardeners make the mistake of either leaving everything untouched or removing far too much. The best result comes from doing only what the plant truly needs. There is one more small habit that made an even bigger difference in my garden than watering or feeding. It takes only a few minutes to do, but it protects the beauty of hostas during the hottest weeks of summer in a way that many people completely overlook. The small habit that changed my hostas more than I expected was paying attention to the sunlight instead of blaming the weather. Many people believe that once a hosta is planted, there's nothing else to think about except watering. I used to believe that too until one unusually hot July when I noticed that only certain leaves were burning while others stayed almost perfect. That made me stop and watch how the sun moved across the garden during the day. I realized that trees had been trimmed over the years, and places that once stayed in gentle shade were now getting several extra hours of direct afternoon sun. My hostas had not changed, but the conditions around them certainly had. From that day on, I stopped assuming that the garden stayed the same from year to year. Sometimes a little more sunlight is enough to stress a hosta through the hottest weeks of summer. I did not rush to dig the plants up because that would have created even more stress in July. Instead, I used simple temporary solutions. A patio umbrella on the hottest afternoons helped one group of hostas. In another area, I placed a light shade cloth for a few weeks during the strongest heat. It was not expensive, and it was easy to remove when the weather became milder. Few people think about temporary shade because they believe every solution must be permanent. In my experience, the hottest part of summer only lasts for a limited time, and often the simplest answer is enough. Another thing I always do is remove weeds growing close to the hostas. Those weeds quietly compete for moisture and nutrients exactly when the plants need every bit of strength they have. It only takes a few minutes every week, but the difference becomes noticeable by late summer. Most gardeners look only at the hosta itself and forget that everything growing around it affects its health. That was another lesson an older gardener shared with me many years ago, and I have never forgotten it. Before long, I also discovered another mistake that many people make without realizing it. They think damaged leaves mean the entire plant is failing. The truth is very different, and once you understand it, you stop worrying every time you see a few brown edges appear during a hot July dot. One thing that gives many gardeners unnecessary worry is seeing a few brown edges or a handful of damaged leaves in July. I know that feeling because I used to walk through the garden convinced that every mark meant I had failed. The truth is that a hosta can still be healthy even if a few leaves show signs of heat stress. What matters is not making quick decisions out of frustration. I have seen people dig up perfectly good plants in the middle of summer because they thought something was seriously wrong. Others cut away half the leaves hoping new ones would grow immediately. Both choices usually leave the plant with even less strength to get through the hottest part of the season. Now, I remind myself to stay patient. I look at the center of the plant first. If fresh leaves are still opening and the crown feels firm, then I know the hosta is doing much better than it appears at first glance. A few damaged leaves do not tell the whole story. They simply remind me that July has been difficult. One habit that has helped me for years is taking a slow walk through the garden every few days instead of trying to fix everything at once. I notice which plants are improving and which ones need a little extra attention. Sometimes all I do is brush away fallen leaves or check the moisture under the mulch. Those small moments often prevent much bigger problems later. Very few people garden this way anymore because everyone wants fast results and instant solutions. The older gardeners who taught me never rushed. They watched their plants carefully and changed only one thing at a time. That quiet patience saved them money and gave them healthier gardens year after year. I have found the same to be true. By the time August arrives, my hostas usually look much stronger than they did a few weeks earlier because I resisted the temptation to overreact. The garden rewards calm decisions far more often than dramatic ones. There is one final lesson that brings all of these simple habits together. It is probably the most important thing I have learned about caring for hostas in summer because it changes not only how the plants look this year, but how strong they return when the next spring arrives. When I look back over all the summers I have spent growing hostas, one thing becomes very clear to me. Healthy plants are usually not the result of expensive products or complicated techniques. They come from a handful of simple habits repeated at the right time. Water when the roots can truly benefit from it. Keep the soil cool instead of letting the summer sun bake it every day. Avoid pushing new growth during the hottest weeks. Give the roots protection with mulch. Watch how the sunlight changes from year to year. Stay patient when a few leaves show signs of stress instead of assuming the whole plant is failing. None of these ideas cost much money, and several of them cost nothing at all. That is probably why many people overlook them. They seem too ordinary to make a real difference. I thought the same years ago until I saw how much stronger my own hostas became by the end of every season. Now, when autumn arrives, my plants still have good color and full healthy clumps while many others nearby have already lost much of their beauty. The best part is that these simple habits also prepare the plants for the following spring. Strong roots that survive summer with less stress wake up with more energy after winter, and the new leaves often look even better than the year before. That is why I never think about July as something I simply need to survive. I see it as the month that decides how my hostas will look for the rest of the year and even into the next season. If you remember only one thing from this video, let it be this. Do not fight the heat by doing more. Help your hostas by doing the right things at the right time, and avoiding the mistakes that quietly weaken them. Gardening has taught me that nature usually rewards patience more than effort. Every summer, I learn something new, and every season reminds me that the oldest methods are often still the most reliable. I hope these simple lessons help you enjoy healthier hostas and a more peaceful garden all the way until autumn. And next time, I will show you another easy old-fashioned method that many gardeners have forgotten, but that can completely change the way shade plants grow in difficult weather.